Ralston hated space, the way cats hated water with a fiery, incomprehensible passion. Yet here she was, floating in a synthetic dreamscape where the laws of physics danced a merry jig just to piss her off. The galaxy's top brass had decided that real battlefields were too mainstream, or maybe they just got off on watching soldiers squirm in digital nightmares. "Hey, Ralston, you think we'll get hazard pay for getting killed in this Matrix crap?" Sergeant Grigg's voice crackled through the comms, the sarcasm thick enough to smother a small planet. "Doubt it," Ralston replied, her fingers tensed around the phantom rifle, a weapon that didn't exist in the real world but felt real enough to cause a headache when it misbehaved. "They'll probably charge us for the privilege." The dreamscape was a patchwork of absurdity, a child's fever dream stitched together with the threads of a madman's tapestry. Fractured landscapes hovered in midair, neon green oceans hung upside down, and the sky was a disco ball of flashing lights, as if the universe had decided to throw one last party before collapsing into a black hole. Ralston's squad was spread out in a tactical formation, or as tactical as you could get when the ground liked to change its mind about staying solid. Corporal Vex waved from a nearby floating rock, his grin visible even through the helmet. Ralston liked Vex, the kind of guy who could find the humor in a funeral, and usually did. "All right, team, focus up," Ralston snapped, trying to sound authoritative while surrounded by what looked like the result of an acid trip gone wrong. "We're here to give the Zarthians a run for their money. Let's show those tentacled know-it-alls that humans don't play by the rules." The Zarthians, the galaxy's own brand of smug, tentacled prophets, floated into view. Their skin shimmered like they'd been dipped in oil and rolled in glitter. Ralston could almost smell the arrogance, a scent somewhere between burnt toast and a politician's promise. "Welcome, humans," the lead Zarthian gurgled, his voice a slippery mix of condescension and pity. "Are you ready to witness the futility of your actions? Futility's our middle name." Griggs muttered, nudging Vex. "What do you think, Vex? Gonna be a cakewalk or a disaster of epic proportions?" Vex gave a shrug that could have meant anything from easy peasy to "we're all going to die." "Well, Ralston," he called out, "what's the plan?" She checked the HUD, not that it made any more sense than the rest of this fever dream. "The plan, Vex, is not to die spectacularly. Pretty sure our insurance doesn't cover alien-induced digital death. It was all a farce, really." The Zarthians and their prophetic nonsense, convinced their vision of inevitability gave them an edge. As if destiny was anything more than a bad joke the universe told over a few drinks. "Let's make history," the Zarthian leader declared, spreading his arms as though awaiting applause. "History's overrated," Ralston muttered. She'd had enough history lessons to know that it usually ended badly for the people in the story. An eerie silence fell over the dreamscape battlefield, the kind that usually preceded something explosively unfortunate. "Here they come," Griggs said, tension creeping into his voice. The Zarthians moved with a fluid grace, like octopuses that had traded the sea for the stars. Their limbs lashed out, slicing through the fabric of the dreamscape, sending ripples through the air that made Ralston's teeth ache. "Watch it," Ralston shouted, diving to the side as a rock the size of a small moon decided it no longer wanted to obey gravity. Vex was on his feet, dodging and weaving through the chaos. "You call this a strategic contest?" "More like a bad acid trip," the Zarthians circled, their laughter a high-pitched tittering that echoed through the battlefield. "Humans always so volatile," the leader sneered, his tone dripping with amusement. Ralston grinned, a feral, toothy thing that promised violence. "Volatile's just a fancy word for unpredictable. Let's show them why you don't bet against an underdog." The humans moved as one, a chaotic ballet of aggression and defiance. Griggs was already unloading rounds into a Zarthian, the alien's surprise a brief flicker before its defensive barriers flared. "You know, for fortune tellers, you'd think they'd at least duck," Griggs quipped, a dark chuckle escaping his lips. Vex was close behind, his movements a blur. Maybe they're too busy gloating over their own brilliance. The Zarthians retaliated, their attacks a hurricane of psychic energy that warped the dreamscape around them. Ralston felt a flash of heat as one of their blasts scorched the air near her face. "Damn it, stay nimble," she barked, diving behind what she hoped was cover, and not an illusion waiting to make her look stupid. "Need a hand, boss?" Vex's voice crackled, full of manic energy. "Just keep them busy. I'll handle the leader." "Gotta teach him that smug looks don't win battles." Ralston surged forward, her weapon spitting fire. The Zarthian leader glided back, confident in his precognitive superiority. But there was a flicker of something else there, a hesitation that Ralston seized on like a shark scenting blood. "That's right, you slippery bastard," she growled. "You can see the future, but you sure as hell aren't gonna like it." The dreamscape twisted, and suddenly she was face to face with the Zarthian leader. His eyes, swirling pools of indigo, bore into hers. "Why do you fight, human?" he asked, almost curious. "Because I can," Ralston replied, pulling the trigger. The leader vanished, reappearing a heartbeat later, seemingly unharmed. "Your efforts are futile," he said, gesturing to the chaos around them. Ralston laughed, the sound harsh and brittle. "Futility's never stopped us before. In fact, we kinda thrive on it." The Zarthian leader's confidence wavered, just for a moment, and Ralston pressed her advantage, relentless and unyielding. "For someone who sees the future, you sure look surprised." The battlefield was a swirling maelstrom, each second a dance of strategy and survival. Griggs and Vex were doing their best to keep the other Zarthians occupied, a task akin to juggling live grenades. "Ralston, any time now," Griggs gasped over comms, the strain evident in his voice. "Almost there," she replied, teeth gritted against the pressure. The Zarthian leader made a final desperate move, his tentacles reaching out with deadly intent. Ralston ducked, rolled, and came up firing. "You know, seeing the future's a neat trick," she taunted. "But maybe you should have seen this coming." The Zarthian staggered, disbelief plain on his alien features. Ralston didn't give him time to recover. She closed the distance, a predator zeroing in on her prey. "You think you've won?" he gasped, defiance lingering even as he faltered. "Winning, such a strong word. Let's call it educational." With a final, decisive strike, she ended the Zarthian leader's reign of smug superiority. The dreamscape quivered, reality reasserting itself in the aftermath of their clash. "Ralston, you glorious lunatic!" Griggs cheered, his voice hoarse but victorious. "Well, that was fun," Vex said, joining them with a tired grin. Ralston surveyed the battlefield, the remnants of the dreamscape flickering like an old holovid on its last legs. "All right, boys," she said, a weary satisfaction in her voice. "Let's get the hell out of this digital nightmare." And as they regrouped, the glow of victory tempered by the knowledge that more battles awaited, Ralston couldn't help but chuckle. It was one contest down, an entire universe's worth of chaos to go. "You know, this unpredictability thing might just catch on," Vex remarked as they walked off into the unknown. Ralston nodded, a smirk on her lips. "Here's hoping." Ralston squinted into the nightmare landscape of the dreamscape, which was about as comforting as a hangover on a roller coaster. The Zarthians, smug bastards that they were, seemed to glide effortlessly through it all like they were born to this madness. Of course, considering their tentacled nature, they probably were. "Ready for round two?" Griggs asked, his voice crackling like old vinyl through the comms. "Do I have a choice?" Ralston replied, adjusting her grip on the phantom rifle that was about as reliable as a politician's promise. The thing was more likely to fire a rubber duck than a bullet, but it was all she had. The Zarthians regrouped, their formation more elegant than a ballroom dance. Ralston couldn't help but notice the way their limbs moved, fluid and graceful. If they weren't trying to kill her, she might have been impressed. "Hey, Vex," she called out. "How much you think we'd make selling Zarthian tentacles to some backwater zoo?" Vex chuckled, ducking under a neon-green wave that had suddenly decided it wanted to fly instead of flow. "Depends. You think they'd pay extra for precognitive ones, or just the regular variety?" "Precogs gotta be worth something," Griggs chimed in. Get him to guess the winner of the next Galactic Cup and we'd be rolling in creds. Ralston shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips despite the chaos. Maybe we should just ask them who's gonna win today. Save everyone some time. The Zarthian leader, floating a few meters away like a smug, dripping chandelier, seemed to sense her gaze. His oily skin glistened in the warped light, and his eyes, those spiraling indigo pits, met hers with a look that could have shamed a supernova. Your resistance is fascinating, he intoned, the words slithering out of him like snakes on a sugar rush. Said the spider to the fly. Ralston shot back. How about you come down here and say that to my face? Vex snorted. Pretty sure they don't have those. What do they got? Griggs asked. Tentacle count over face count. Sounds like a bad deal. The Zarthian leader's amusement was palpable. Humans always so, inventive in their bravado. Do you not see the inevitability of your defeat? Ralston rolled her eyes, pretending the sheer scale of the dreamscape didn't make her stomach flip. Inevitability, just an expensive word for laziness. We're good at improvising. It's our thing. The Zarthians began their assault again, using their precognitive abilities like a rigged lottery. Every time Ralston thought she had an edge, they were there, one step ahead, smirking with those non-faces of theirs. It's like fighting a damn mirror, Griggs cursed, taking cover behind a flickering shard of what might have been reality. They know what we're gonna do before we do it, yeah, Ralston agreed, notching her rifle to a marginally more lethal setting. But mirrors crack if you hit them hard enough. Let's give it a shot, Vex said, pivoting with a nimbleness that would have made a gymnast weep. He fired his own weapon, the phantom bullets leaving trails like a comet on a sugar high. Ralston joined him, her shots peppering the air. The Zarthians dodged, each movement fluid and infuriatingly precise. They countered with blasts of psychic energy that twisted the dreamscape even further, turning the battlefield into a Salvador Dali painting on hallucinogens. This reminds me of my ex, Vex muttered, ducking another attack. Always knew what I was gonna screw up before I did. Ralston snorted, adrenaline making her giddy. And just like your ex, let's see if we can't send them packing. Vex's grin was visible even through his helmet. With pleasure, boss. The humans danced through the chaos, their unpredictability the only thing keeping them alive. They were rough, unrefined, and made more mistakes than a first-year recruit, but they didn't stop. The Zarthians couldn't predict sheer human insanity. Griggs was the first to capitalize on the advantage. He tossed a grenade, digital but potent, into the midst of a Zarthian cluster. The aliens, so used to dodging bullets, hadn't anticipated explosives. Boom, Griggs said, satisfaction curling in his voice as the blast rippled through the dreamscape. Can't predict crazy. The Zarthians reeled, their formation breaking for the first time. Ralston saw an opening and charged, her rifle blazing like a sun that had forgotten how to set. We got him on the ropes, she yelled, her voice raw from shouting. Ropes being a relative term, Vex quipped, his movements almost a blur as he followed Ralston's lead. More like a tangled mess of yarn. The Zarthian leader, for once, seemed less certain. His eyes flicked between the humans, trying to piece together their next move. But that was the thing about humans. There was no pattern, no logic, just sheer chaos masquerading as strategy. Your defiance is unexpected, the leader admitted, his voice tinged with something that might have been respect if aliens had such a concept. Unexpected's in our DNA, Ralston replied, firing off a shot that clipped one of his tentacles. You should try it sometime. The leader recoiled, surprise evident even in his alien features. Ralston pressed the advantage, her focus narrowing to a singular point. This was it, the moment to show these prophetic bastards that knowing the future didn't mean controlling it. You're reckless, the Zarthian leader observed, his voice tight. And you're predictable, Ralston countered, ducking a swipe from one of his limbs. Guess which one's more fun? The dreamscape shimmered, reality bending under the strain of their conflict. Griggs and Vex kept the other Zarthians busy, their movements a dance of desperation and madness. Ralston, don't get too cocky, Griggs warned, but there was pride in his voice too. Who, me? Ralston called back, a grin splitting her face. I'm the picture of humility. With a final burst of effort, she closed the gap between her and the Zarthian leader. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and she felt the rifle buck against her shoulder as it fired. The leader staggered, a flicker of disbelief crossing his inhuman features. "This isn't possible," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Ralston shrugged, not bothering to hide her smirk. "Like I said, unpredictability our thing." The Zarthian leader faltered, his precognitive edge dulled by the human's sheer audacity. The dreamscape quaked, the digital fabric beginning to fray under the weight of their struggle. "We did it," Vex whooped, his joy infectious even through the comms. "Not yet," Ralston cautioned, but the thrill of near victory buzzed in her veins. The Zarthians regrouped, their leaders fall a rallying point rather than a defeat. The aliens moved with renewed purpose, their arrogance replaced by a cold determination. Boss, they're not giving up," Griggs noted, an edge of concern creeping into his tone. Ralston nodded, acknowledging the truth of his words. "Then neither are we. Let's show them what it really means to dig in." The dreamscape around them twisted, the very air vibrating with the conflict's intensity. Ralston felt the weight of the moment, the knowledge that this was far from over. "We're not done yet, team," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. "Let's keep them guessing." The Zarthians launched their counterattack, their tactics evolving as they adapted to the humans' unpredictability. Ralston felt the pressure mounting, the fight becoming a test of endurance and ingenuity. "It's getting dicey," Vex commented, his humor a thin veneer over the tension. Ralston nodded, her focus unwavering. "Good thing we're gamblers." The battlefield was a swirling vortex of energy and intent, the dreamscape a living thing caught in the throes of their conflict. Ralston felt the weight of the moment, the knowledge that this was a fight not just for survival but for supremacy. "They're learning," Griggs warned, his voice crackling with static. "So are we," Ralston replied, determination steeling her spine. With each attack, the humans adapted, their responses fluid and ever-changing. The Zarthians, for all their foresight, struggled to keep pace with the humans' chaotic ingenuity. "Let's show them why you don't mess with crazy," Ralston urged, her voice a rallying cry amidst the chaos. The Zarthians pressed their advantage, their attacks relentless. But the humans, buoyed by their initial success, refused to back down. They fought with a ferocity born of desperation and defiance, their unpredictability the only thing keeping them from being overwhelmed. Ralston felt the dreamscape shifting, the digital battlefield a living entity responding to their struggle. The Zarthians, for all their precognitive prowess, couldn't predict the humans' sheer audacity. "They can't keep up," Vex noted, his voice tinged with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "Maybe they should have read the fine print on unpredictability," Ralston quipped, her confidence a beacon amidst the darkness. The dreamscape reached a crescendo, the air vibrating with the force of their conflict. Ralston felt the tension thrumming through her, a live wire of possibility and peril. "We can't keep this up forever," Griggs cautioned, his voice strained. Ralston nodded, acknowledging the truth of his words. "Then let's make it count while we can." The Zarthians rallied, their leader's absence a void that spurred them to greater heights. The humans, for all their bravado, felt the pressure mounting, the weight of the fight pressing down on them. Their regrouping, Vex warned, his voice tight with urgency. Ralston took a deep breath, readying herself for the final push. "Then we give them something they can't ignore." With a final burst of effort, the humans launched their counteroffensive, their tactics a whirlwind of chaos and cunning. The Zarthians, for all their foresight, were caught off guard by the humans' sheer audacity. "This is it," Ralston urged, her voice a rallying cry amidst the chaos. "Let's show them what it really means to be unpredictable." The Zarthians faltered, their confidence shaken by the humans' relentless assault. Ralston felt the tide turning, the dreamscape quivering under the weight of their conflict. "We've got them on the ropes," Griggs noted, his voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. Ralston nodded, her focus unwavering. "Then let's finish this." The battlefield was a maelstrom of energy, the dreamscape alive with the force of their struggle. Ralston felt the weight of the moment, the knowledge that this was a fight not just for survival but for dominance. "We're not giving up," she promised, her voice a vow amidst the chaos. The humans pressed their advantage, their unpredictability a weapon the Zarthians couldn't counter. Ralston felt the thrill of near-victory buzz in her veins, the knowledge that they were closer than ever to overcoming the odds. "Let's show them what it really means to stand our ground," she urged, her voice a rallying cry amidst the chaos. The dreamscape trembled, a living entity caught in the throes of their conflict. Ralston felt the weight of the moment, the knowledge that this was a fight not just for survival but for supremacy. And as the humans pressed their advantage, their unpredictability a weapon the Zarthians couldn't counter, Ralston knew they were closer than ever to turning the tide. "We're not done yet, team," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. "Let's keep them guessing." And as they fought on, their unpredictability a weapon the Zarthians couldn't counter, Ralston knew they were closer than ever to turning the tide. "You know, I always thought my life would end in a more traditional setting," Ralston muttered, ducking under a stray tentacle swipe. "Like dying of boredom at my desk job back on Earth. But here we are," Griggs chimed in over comms, his voice crackling with static like an old radio station, as unreliable as Ralston's phantom rifle. "Just a bunch of lunatics trying to out-crazy some space squids." Ralston dodged another tentacle, her rifle spitting out digital rounds that fizzled more often than they'd hit. "I'm starting to think these Zarthian bastards were onto something with their whole predict the future SH stick. I mean, it sure would have helped right about now." "Yeah, but then we'd be boring," Vex called out, his voice a bright note amid the chaos. "And who wants that?" "Not us, apparently." Ralston glanced at the mess that was their makeshift squad, each person moving with a kind of desperate agility that bordered on suicidal. This wasn't a battle, it was a circus act gone wrong. But they were still here, still fighting and still unpredictably human. "All right, team," she barked, pivoting to avoid a Zarthian lunge. "Time to get stupid." "Finally, our specialty," Vex whooped, throwing in a half-hearted salute before drawing the attention of a particularly irritable Zarthian. Ralston grinned. "Here's the plan, don't have one. Just do whatever the hell feels wrong." The squad responded with a chorus of half-nervous, half-insane cheers. If the enemy wanted a strategy, they'd give them the anti-strategy. Chaos was their ally and they'd use it until their last breath. "So, basically what we've been doing all along but with more flair," Griggs suggested, his sarcasm as sharp as ever. "Exactly," Ralston confirmed, mentally crossing her fingers that their idiocy was enough to tip the scales. "Let's show these tentacled prophets what real unpredictability looks like." With that, she charged, her rifle blaring and her heart pounding like a drum of war. The dreamscape warped around her, colors shifting in and out of focus, like a fever dream that had taken a wrong turn. Vex flanked her, his laughter a wild sound that cut through the madness. "Last one to take down a squid buys drinks," he shouted, firing at a Zarthian and missing spectacularly. "You're on," Ralston replied, her focus split between dodging death and correcting her aim. Her rifle's reliability was a joke, but it was the only punchline they had. And in this nightmare of a battlefield, they were the comedians. The Zarthians hesitated, their tentacles wavering like they were trying to grasp an invisible thread of logic, only to find it had unraveled in their hands. Their leader might have been out of the picture, but their arrogance was a hard habit to kick. Ralston sidestepped a digital projectile, reloading her rifle with a flick of her wrist. Newsflash, no plan, no pattern. Who knew being undisciplined would be such a tactical advantage? Griggs quipped, his digital grenades creating a symphony of chaos in the ranks of the Zarthians. "You've got to keep him guessing," Vex added, taking a wild potshot that somehow hit home. "Like a bad sitcom that just won't end." Ralston spotted a gap in the Zarthian line, their confusion a palpable thing, and she seized it. Her rifle spat out a series of rounds, the recoil jarring but familiar. Predictably, only half the shots did what they were supposed to, but at least it was progress. "Nice shot," Vex cheered, even though they both knew it was more luck than skill. "Thanks, but don't expect an encore," Ralston replied, her grin a feral thing. "This gun's got a mind of its own, just like its owner." Grigg's voice was nearly drowned out by the sounds of Zarthian frustration, a melody of rage that was music to their reckless ears. Ralston's vision blurred for a moment, the dreamscape rippling like it couldn't make up its mind. The Zarthians, normally a well-oiled machine of foresight, flailed like they'd been tossed into a blender. Ralston could almost hear the circuits of their predictive minds frying. "Think they're regretting not reading the Human Insanity Manual?" Vex asked, his voice tight with adrenaline. Ralston chuckled, the sound as jagged as shattered glass. "Let's hope they don't get a refund." The battle felt less like combat and more like performance art, where improvisation was key and the stakes were life or death. Ralston danced through the chaos, her movements a testament to human stubbornness if not grace. "We're making progress," Griggs noted, his tone betraying a hint of disbelief. "Or maybe they're just letting us win to make us feel better. Either way, not complaining," Ralston replied, narrowly dodging a Zarthian swipe. "Let 'em think we're idiots. Only fair since we kinda are." Vex laughed, a breathless sound. "Idiots with guns and dreams, apparently." Ralston watched as the Zarthians scrambled to adapt, their movements lacking the fluidity of before. It was working, barely, but working. Their unpredictability was finally finding its mark. The dreamscape around them shimmered, reality flickering like a bad hologram. Ralston felt the ground shift beneath her feet, but she held steady. It wasn't the first time the universe had tried to throw her off balance. "Incoming," Griggs warned, as a Zarthian squad regrouped, their tentacles weaving together a net of deadly intent. Ralston took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. And that's when it hit her, the kind of idea only a desperate person would consider. "Hey, Vex," she called, a new plan forming in her mind. "Remember that old human trick, the one involving a rope and a lot of chaos? Going fishing?" "Now," Vex replied, barely dodging another attack. "You're crazier than I thought, boss." "Crazy's all we've got," Ralston replied with a grin. "Get ready to reel him in." The Zarthians advanced, their movements coordinated, but Ralston was betting on the one thing they couldn't see coming. She dashed forward, weaving between their ranks like a thread through a needle, drawing their attention like a bullfighter. Griggs and Vex followed suit, their movements a chaotic dance that defied logic. And as the Zarthians closed in, Ralston gave the signal, a quick, sharp whistle that cut through the noise. "Now," she yelled, and the squad sprang into action, each member moving in a different direction, a web of unpredictability that pulled the Zarthians in every which way. The aliens hesitated, their tentacles caught in a tangle of confusion. Ralston took the opportunity to strike, her rifle firing in a wild arc that somehow found its targets. "Nice catch," Vex commented, his voice a mix of admiration and disbelief. "Don't get cocky," Ralston replied, though she couldn't hide the satisfaction in her tone. "Still a lot of fish in this sea." The Zarthians struggled to regroup, their predictive abilities rendered useless by the humans' sheer insanity. Ralston felt the tide turning, the dreamscape quivering with the weight of their defiance. Griggs' voice cut through the chaos, a steady anchor amidst the storm. "Think they're finally starting to regret this," Ralston chuckled, the sound rough but triumphant. "They better be, because we're just getting started." The squad pressed their advantage, their movements a symphony of chaos that even the Zarthians couldn't predict. Ralston felt the thrill of it, the knowledge that they were closer than ever to victory. "We're not done yet," she called, her voice a rallying cry. "Keep them guessing, keep them reeling. Let's show them what it really means to fight without a plan." And as they moved through the dreamscape, their unpredictability a weapon the Zarthians couldn't counter, Ralston knew they'd found their rhythm. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't predictable, but it was theirs. "Let's finish this," she urged, her resolve as steady as the pulse of the battlefield. The Zarthians faltered, their arrogance replaced by a dawning realization that their foresight was useless against the humans' sheer audacity. Ralston felt the dreamscape shift, reality bending under the force of their will. "Keep up the pressure," Griggs advised, his voice a mix of caution and excitement. "Don't worry," Ralston replied, her determination a palpable thing. "We've got them right where we want them," and for the first time she believed it. This wasn't just survival, it was a declaration. A message to the universe that humans, for all their faults, couldn't be predicted, couldn't be tamed. "Let's show them what it means to be human," she called, her voice carrying over the chaos. The squad surged forward, their movements a testament to human ingenuity and madness. The Zarthians, for all their foresight, couldn't keep up with the humans' sheer defiance. Ralston felt the dreamscape quiver beneath them, the digital battlefield responding to their struggle. "And here I thought Monday meetings were tough," Vex joked, his laughter a bright note in the madness. "At least in those you don't die," Griggs added, his tone dry as dust. Ralston grinned, the sound of gunfire and chaos a backdrop to their insane ballet. Who needs a plan when you've got unpredictability? The humans pressed their advantage, their actions a whirlwind of chaos that no amount of foresight could counter. Ralston felt the tide turning, the dreamscape trembling under the force of their struggle. "Keep pushing," she urged, her voice steady amidst the chaos. "Let's show them what it really means to fight without rules." As the Zarthians faltered, the humans found their rhythm, a chaotic, unpredictable dance that defied logic and reason. Ralston felt the thrill of it, the knowledge that they were closer than ever to turning the tide. "Let's show them what it means to be human," she called, her voice a rallying cry that cut through the madness. And as they fought on, their unpredictability a weapon the Zarthians couldn't counter, Ralston knew they'd found their stride. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't conventional, but it was theirs. And that was enough. The dreamscape decided if it couldn't beat them with logic, it might as well drown them in chaos. Ralston could almost feel the Zarthians' collective grumbling as the scenery around them shifted faster than the mood swings of a caffeinated teenager. "Look sharp, team," Ralston barked, as the ground beneath them morphed into something resembling a Salvador Dali painting after a night out with Picasso. "It's about to get weird." "About to?" Vex snorted, trying not to trip over what looked suspiciously like a melting clock. "I thought we left normal at the door ages ago." "Normal's overrated," Griggs chimed in over the comms, the crackle of static barely masking his dry amusement. "Besides, who needs a coherent battlefield when you've got abstract art?" Ahead, the Zarthians were doing what tentacled nightmares apparently do best: adapt. Their movements were less octopus on roller skates and more octopus with a vendetta. The aliens began to twist reality around them, conjuring up labyrinthine paths and obstacles that changed with the breeze. It was like trying to navigate a maze designed by a particularly sadistic game show host. "Anyone else feel like a lab rat?" Vex commented, ducking under a hallucination that threatened to decapitate him. "And not the genius kind, either." "Welcome to the experiment," Ralston replied, her eyes scanning for a path through the madness. "Now let's make sure we break the damn thing." As if on cue, the Zarthians started launching digital projectiles in arcs that defied basic physics, the air buzzing with their erratic hum. "You know, I think we've really grown on them," Griggs remarked, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Like a fungus." Ralston aimed her phantom rifle, knowing full well it was about as reliable as a politician's promise. She squeezed the trigger, and miraculously, the weapon decided to cooperate for once, sending a round straight into one of the Zarthians' writhing appendages. "Nice shot, Ralston," Vex said, sidestepping a projectile that tried to rearrange his molecules. "Think your gun's developing a conscience?" "More like selective competence," Ralston grumbled. "Like the rest of us." The dreamscape shimmered again, the Zarthians evidently deciding that psychological warfare was their best bet. They whipped up illusions that danced at the edge of the human mind, flashes of earth and home, comforting but at the same time unnervingly alien. "Hey, look," Vex called out, pointing at a vision of blue skies and green fields. "It's Earth before we broke it." "Very funny," Ralston replied. "Or it would be if we weren't minutes away from becoming alien sushi." "Ah, nostalgia," Griggs sighed dramatically over the comms. "A distraction and a half." Ralston shook her head, clearing the phantoms of a past long gone. "Enough with the memory lane tour. Let's give them a history lesson they won't forget." The team pushed forward, weaving through the nightmare landscape with a kind of reckless grace that was all their own. The Zarthians, apparently frustrated by their inability to predict, let alone control, the humans, ramped up their efforts with a new wave of attacks, these ones more coordinated, more desperate. "Looks like they finally decided to take us seriously," Vex observed, his voice tinged with mock surprise. "About time," Ralston shot back, narrowly avoiding a particularly aggressive sliver of reality that attempted to spear her. "I was starting to feel underappreciated." The dreamscape warped again, the Zarthians throwing everything they had into the mix. Walls of solid light sprang up, forcing the squad to pivot and adapt on the fly. Ralston's mind raced, calculating paths, weighing options, and discarding them just as quickly. Griggs' voice crackled into her ear. "Any brilliant ideas, fearless leader?" Ralston paused, considering their options. "Yeah, don't die." "Inspirational as always," Griggs quipped. "We should put that on a t-shirt." Ralston ducked under a tentacle that swept through the air, its path erratic and deadly. "If we survive, you can start a merch line." The Zarthians, realizing their barrage was failing to turn the tide, began to focus their efforts, trying to pin the humans down with concentrated fire. It was a futile effort, like trying to corral cats with ADHD. "Incoming!" Vex shouted, as a particularly large projectile hurtled toward them, leaving an angry trail in its wake. The team scattered, each moving in a different direction, refusing to be penned in. Ralston's heart pounded as she darted through the chaos. She knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The Zarthians were relentless, each missed prediction only fueling their determination to crush the unpredictable human force. "We need to find their nerve center," Ralston said, her voice laced with determination. "They're coordinating from somewhere and I want to knock it off its perch." "You think they've got a command post in this mess?" Vex asked, his tone incredulous. "Could be, or it could just be wishful thinking," Ralston admitted, "but it's worth a shot." "Then let's give it a good all-human try," Griggs chimed in. "And by that I mean make it up as we go." Ralston grinned, feeling the adrenaline surge through her veins. "Exactly. Let's show them what real improvisation looks like." The squad regrouped, their resolve filling the gaps where experience might have faltered. Ralston led the charge, her phantom rifle spitting defiance as she carved a path through the chaos. Around them the dreamscape writhed and howled, a beast denied its prey. "Keep moving," she ordered, her voice a steady anchor amidst the madness. "We find their center and give him a taste of unpredictability." The further they pressed, the more the Zarthians seemed to falter, their cohesion fracturing under the relentless human assault. It was a gamble, a desperate last stand against a foe whose very nature defied understanding. But if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was defying the odds. "Look lively, people," Ralston shouted as they approached a particularly dense cluster of Zarthians. "It's gonna get dicey." "Dicey?" Vex laughed, breathless yet unyielding. "I live for dicey." The Zarthians, sensing their strategy unraveling, doubled down on their attacks, their tentacles weaving an intricate ballet of destruction. Yet for all their efforts they seemed unable to land a decisive blow. "Almost there," Ralston called out, her voice a beacon of determination. Just a little further, the team surged forward, a whirlwind of chaos and grit, their movements a dance of survival and defiance. The Zarthians, for all their foresight, couldn't match the humans' sheer audacity. "There!" Ralston shouted, spotting a cluster of alien activity that seemed to pulse with a rhythm all its own. "That's it. Hit it with everything you've got." Her team responded with unflinching resolve, their weapons roaring to life as they unleashed a torrent of chaos upon the Zarthian command point. The aliens reeled, their coordination splintering under the assault. "How's that for unpredictability?" Vex shouted, his voice a mixture of exhilaration and disbelief. "Beautiful," Ralston replied, her grin feral and fierce. "Absolutely beautiful." As the Zarthians scrambled to recover, the dreamscape around them flickered, reality straining against the weight of their defiance. Ralston felt the shift, the change in the air, as though the very fabric of the alien world was beginning to unravel. "Keep pushing," she urged, her voice filled with a fire that refused to be extinguished. "We've got them on the ropes." The dreamscape quivered, the Zarthians' once unassailable control slipping through their fingers like sand. Ralston knew they weren't done yet, knew that this was just the beginning of their struggle. But for the first time, she could see the glimmer of possibility, the faintest spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide. "Let's finish this," she called, her voice a rallying cry that cut through the chaos. "Let's show them what it means to be human." And as they fought on, their unpredictability a weapon the Zarthians couldn't counter, Ralston knew they'd found their stride. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't conventional, but it was theirs. And that was enough. Ralston wiped a smudge of blood and God knows what off her cheek, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "So, who ordered the existential crisis with a side of doom? Didn't you?" Vex asked, dodging a tentacle that looked like it was auditioning for the role of most aggressive appendage in some alien Broadway production. "Thought it was on the menu." "Apparently, we're the main dish," Griggs chimed in, his voice a comforting balm of sarcasm over the comms. "But hey, at least they're feeding us a buffet of regret." Ralston gritted her teeth, her phantom rifle behaving about as well as a toddler in a candy store, shooting in fits and starts. "We need a new plan, and I'm open to suggestions that don't involve dying horribly." "I was saving my best idea for last," Vex quipped, narrowly avoiding another projectile that seemed to twist space and time around it. "You know, the one where we survive and all." "Hold onto your optimism, Vex. Might be the only thing that doesn't get blown to bits," Ralston replied, firing a shot that actually managed to hit something other than thin air. She could almost hear the Zarthian she hit shriek if it had been capable of such a sound. "Speaking of optimism," Griggs cut in, "I'm getting some seriously bad vibes from our situation." "Anyone else think the Zarthians are getting the upper tentacle here?" Ralston didn't want to admit it, but the Zarthians were regrouping, their earlier disarray coalescing into something that looked disturbingly like a strategy. "They've got the foresight to be an absolute pain in the ass, that's for sure." "Well, I always said I wanted to go out against a superior foe," Vex noted dryly, sprinting beside Ralston over a patch of ground that seemed intent on vanishing beneath their feet. "Yeah, I was hoping for death by chocolate," Griggs added, his voice a static-laced lifeline of humor in the chaos. The Zarthians' tentacles slithered through the air with a purpose, their movements a slippery dance of menace. Ralston felt a pang of frustration as she watched them close ranks, their command point now defended by a veritable wall of writhing, nightmarish limbs. "Well, this is just fantastic," Vex growled, narrowly avoiding a sweep from a tentacle that would have sent him flying. "We're like bugs on a windshield, except the windshield is armed and pissed," Ralston replied, her voice barely rising above the din of combat. She felt a bead of sweat trickle down her spine, the insidious thought of failure lurking at the edges of her mind. The squad pressed on, their tempo an erratic dance of survival against the Zarthians' coordinated chaos. But no matter how they twisted and turned, the aliens seemed to counter every move, predicting their tactics with a precision that suggested they'd been doing this a lot longer than they'd been breathing. It was a game of chess, where the opponent knew every possible move before they'd even thought of making it, and Ralston was seriously starting to hate chess. "You know, I'm starting to think they might just be a tad smarter than us," Vex said, not quite managing to sound all that surprised. "Could be," Griggs responded, his voice as flat as the universe was wide. "Or maybe they just have a better sense of humor." Ralston's team was caught in a grim ballet of moves and countermoves, each second ticking by like a countdown to inevitable defeat. But just as she was considering how to rewrite the ending, the universe decided to throw another wrench into the works. "Ralston, we've got a problem," Griggs said, his usually sardonic tone replaced with something heavier. "Vex is down." Ralston's heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" "Looks like he got a little too friendly with one of those tentacles," Griggs reported. "He's alive, but he's not getting up any time soon." "Damn it," Ralston hissed, glancing toward where Vex lay, crumpled like a discarded marionette. The sight sent a chill down her spine, the realization striking her that their already precarious situation had just taken a nosedive off a cliff. The Zarthians were capitalizing on their advantage, their attacks gaining a frenetic edge as they sensed victory within reach. The humans were struggling, their line weakening under the relentless assault. "Hold them off as best you can," Ralston ordered, her voice taut with urgency. "We've got to get Vex out of here." "Sounds good," Griggs replied, though the strain in his voice was evident. "As plans go, not dying is always a winner." Ralston pushed forward, the dreamscape around her a blur of motion and danger. Every step felt heavier, as if the dreamscape itself was conspiring with the Zarthians to drag her down. But she refused to let it win, refused to give in to the oppressive sense of impending doom. They reached Vex, his face a mask of pain but his eyes still twinkling with the irrepressible humor that had made him such a vital part of the team. "So, what's the plan, boss?" Vex rasped, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Get you upright, then redefine reckless abandon," Ralston replied, managing a thin smile despite the dire circumstances. "Sounds like my kind of plan," Vex chuckled, though it ended in a wince. With Griggs providing cover, Ralston helped Vex to his feet. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't graceful, but it was enough to get him moving again. "Think you can walk?" Ralston asked, her voice laced with a mix of concern and determination. "I can do better than that," Vex replied, his bravado only slightly undermined by the grimace that crossed his face when he put weight on his leg. "Just point me at the enemy and get out of the way. Let's show those tentacled bastards what a real human clusterfuck looks like," Griggs said, his voice regaining its familiar sardonic edge. The squad regrouped, a battered but unbroken unit, determination etched into their very bones. They knew the odds were stacked against them, knew that their chances of coming out on top were slimmer than a hair on a snake. But they'd faced worse before, or at least they hoped they had. "You ready?" Ralston asked, looking at each of her teammates in turn. "Born ready," Vex replied, wielding his weapon with the grace of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. "Bring it on," Griggs added, his voice steady as a rock. The Zarthians, sensing the humans' renewed resolve, redoubled their efforts, their tentacles weaving through the air in a deadly dance of precision. Ralston led the charge, her team following close behind, a storm of chaos and unpredictability. The Zarthians fought back with everything they had, their foresight and precision a formidable barrier against the human onslaught. But for all their planning, all their calculation, they couldn't account for one thing: the sheer bloody-mindedness of humans when backed into a corner. Ralston and her team moved like a force unleashed, their attacks a blur of determination and defiance. The Zarthians tried to counter, but the humans were a whirlwind of insanity that no amount of foresight could tame. The dreamscape seemed to tremble as the battle reached its fever pitch. The air crackled with energy, the clash of wills and weapons reverberating through the alien environment. Ralston could feel the tide turning, could sense the Zarthians' confidence faltering under the relentless pressure. It was a tiny flicker of hope in a sea of despair, but it was enough to fuel their resistance. "You seeing this?" Vex called out, his voice a beacon of unyielding defiance. "Seeing it," Griggs replied, his laughter a defiant challenge to the universe itself. Ralston grinned, her heart pounding with the rhythm of battle and camaraderie. She could see the Zarthians wavering, their once unassailable coordination slipping as they struggled to adapt to the humans' unpredictable tactics. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble in a game that should have been decided before it even began. But for the first time, Ralston dared to hope that they could win, that they could defy the odds and come out on top. "Let's finish this," she called out, her voice a rallying cry that cut through the chaos like a knife. And with that, Ralston and her team launched their final assault, their weapons roaring to life as they tore through the Zarthian defenses with a fury that defied description. The dreamscape around them shuddered, the very fabric of reality straining under the weight of their defiance. The Zarthians, for all their foresight and planning, were caught off guard by the humans' sheer audacity. It was a fight for survival, a struggle against insurmountable odds that had become all too familiar. But Ralston and her team were relentless, their resolve unyielding in the face of adversity. As they fought on, the Zarthians' confidence crumbled, their once cohesive strategy reduced to chaos by the humans' unorthodox tactics. Ralston knew they weren't out of the woods yet, knew that the battle was far from over. But as she fought alongside her team, their laughter and banter a constant reminder of the spirit that drove them, she knew that they had a chance. And sometimes, a chance was all you needed. Ralston surveyed the chaotic battlefield with the detached precision of a weary office worker figuring out the least painful way to quit. The dreamscape twisted and blurred around them, shifting scenery like a bad acid trip in a funhouse mirror. Nothing made sense, and she had a hunch that might be their best bet at surviving. "All right, folks," Ralston called, gathering her ragtag band of misfits. "I've got a plan so insane it just might work, or at least confuse the hell out of them." Vex, leaning on his rifle like a crutch, raised an eyebrow. "I hope it involves us winning. I really hate losing, almost as much as I hate Mondays." "Think of it as a random dance party," Ralston replied, suppressing a grin. "Only with more guns and less rhythm," Griggs chimed in, voice crackling over the comms. "So basically a normal Saturday night for us." Ralston nodded. "Everyone just do something, anything, but don't make it make sense." Vex chuckled, which quickly turned into a grimace. "A total free-for-all, I like it. Anarchy always did suit me." Ralston took a deep breath, trying to ignore the mess of her life back on Earth, where her biggest challenge had been filing TPS reports without losing her mind. Now she was commanding a squad in the middle of a digital maelstrom, with tentacled aliens doing their best impression of a psychic octopus. She wished she could find a complaint box somewhere in this hellscape. "All right, let's shake things up," she said, more to herself than to her team. The Zarthians had regrouped, their tentacles weaving through the air with a precision that suggested they had PhDs in synchronized swimming. Their foresight was uncanny, predicting human movements with the accuracy of a fortune teller on a hot streak. Ralston was betting everything on the human capacity for chaos. If they could just be random enough, unpredictable enough, it might give them an edge. "Just follow my lead," Ralston ordered. "Which means ignore everything I just said and do whatever feels right." Griggs laughed, the sound a dry rasp like sandpaper on a chalkboard. "If we die, I'm blaming you," Ralston smirked. "If we die, I'm blaming the universe for having such a crappy sense of humor." With that, she dove into the fray, zigzagging across the dreamscape with the grace of a drunk goose. Her phantom rifle spat digital death in every direction, not so much targeting the Zarthians as it was creating a wall of chaos for them to trip over. The dreamscape responded to their anarchy, colors shifting, geometry warping, like a Picasso painting having a nervous breakdown. The Zarthians hesitated, their precious foresight struggling to keep up with the nonsensical dance the humans were performing. Vex, apparently deciding that now was a good time for interpretive dance, spun on his feet, launching volleys of mockery and projectiles with equal fervor. "Eat this, you overgrown calamari." The Zarthians flinched, their tentacles momentarily thrown off balance by the sheer audacity of the human offensive. Ralston grinned, feeling the tide begin to turn in their favor. "Keep it up," she shouted, her voice cutting through the cacophony like a lighthouse in a storm. Let's give them a taste of human unpredictability. Griggs, who had taken to leaping between cover points like a hyperactive rabbit, chimed in. It's like they've never seen chaos theory in action. Welcome to the madness, tentacle heads. Ralston's squad, bolstered by the insanity of their new tactic, fought with renewed vigor, their unpredictability gnawing away at the Zarthians' calculated plans. It was working barely, but sometimes barely was all you needed. Ralston had never been one for gambling, but she'd learned that sometimes you had to roll the dice and hope for a lucky 7. In this case, it was less about luck and more about throwing logic out the airlock. "How are we doing, Vex?" Ralston called, ducking under a tentacle that came way too close to rearranging her face. Vex grunted, his weapon blazing. "Surprisingly alive. Not sure how long that's gonna last, though." The dreamscape warped again, the ground shifting beneath them like a giant trying to shake off a bad case of fleas. Ralston stumbled, barely managing to keep her footing. "Anyone else feeling seasick?" Griggs asked, his voice a thread of sardonic humor that somehow anchored them against the chaos. "Only in the mornings," Vex replied, breathless but still grinning, his spirits lifted by the absurdity of their approach. The Zarthians, for all their tentacled majesty, were struggling. Their precision was no match for the sheer madness the humans were throwing at them. It was like trying to catch a tornado with a butterfly net. Ralston's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and out of their minds, but they were holding their own, and that was more than she dared to hope for. "Keep it up," she urged, her voice a rallying cry. "We've got them on the ropes." The Zarthians, their foresight failing them, began to fall back, their ranks breaking as the human assault shredded their strategy. Ralston could see the cracks in their cohesion, and it spurred her on. "Time for the grand finale," Griggs suggested, sounding way too cheerful about the prospect of a last stand. Ralston nodded, adrenaline surging through her veins. "Let's make it a show to remember." They charged, a whirlwind of chaos and defiance, their battle cries echoing in the dreamscape. The Zarthians, caught off guard by the humans' audacity, faltered, their tentacles flailing uselessly as they tried to regain control. Ralston knew it was a long shot, knew that they were teetering on the edge of destruction, but they had one thing the Zarthians didn't: a complete disregard for the rules. As the squad pressed their advantage, the Zarthians' confidence crumbled, their carefully constructed plans unraveling in the face of human insanity. It was a glorious, beautiful mess, and Ralston loved every second of it. "Can you believe this?" Vex shouted, his laughter cutting through the chaos like a knife. "We're doing it," Ralston grinned, her heart pounding with the thrill of the fight. "I always knew we'd win by being the craziest bastards in the room." The battle raged on, a symphony of madness and destruction that defied logic and reason. The dreamscape twisted and shifted, reflecting the chaos of the combatants locked in a struggle that neither side could afford to lose. Ralston felt a surge of hope, a flicker of possibility in a universe that had seemed determined to thwart them at every turn. They were winning, defying the odds with the sheer force of their will. The Zarthians, overwhelmed by the humans' unpredictable tactics, were in full retreat, their tentacles dragging as they tried to regroup. It was a sight that filled Ralston with a fierce sense of triumph. "We've got them," she called out, her voice brimming with exhilaration. "Let's finish this." With one final push, Ralston and her team surged forward, their attacks a blur of determination and defiance. The Zarthians, unable to withstand the onslaught, crumbled, their foresight and precision no match for the humans' chaotic brilliance. As the dreamscape settled into a semblance of calm, Ralston allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They'd done it, against all odds, and it felt damn good. Vex limped up beside her, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I can't believe we pulled that off." Griggs joined them, his sardonic smile as wide as the universe. "Just goes to show, sometimes the best strategy is having no strategy at all." Ralston surveyed the battlefield, a sense of weary triumph washing over her. They'd survived, and in doing so, they'd reminded the universe of the one undeniable truth: humans were impossible to predict. "All right, team," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos they just endured. "Let's get the hell out of here before they change their minds." With that, they turned their back on the dreamscape, their spirits lifted by their improbable victory. They'd beaten the odds, defied logic, and proven that sometimes, just sometimes, madness was the best weapon of all. As they made their way back to safer ground, Ralston couldn't help but chuckle. The galaxy was a crazy place, but with a little chaos and a lot of guts, maybe they had a fighting chance after all. Ralston and her crew of merry misfits stood in the midst of the battlefield, if you could call the dreamscape that without bursting into laughter. The ground beneath their feet swirled like an indecisive chameleon, the colors never quite settling on any particular hue. It was all a bit much for a Monday morning, but here they were, trying to figure out how to out-crazy a bunch of psychic squids. "All right, listen up," Ralston said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a rusty knife through half-decent cheese. "We're gonna turn this mess up to 11. Vex, still leaning on his rifle like it was a particularly unreliable crutch, arched an eyebrow. 11, why stop there? Let's crank it to 12 and see if the universe collapses," Ralston chuckled. The idea was almost inviting. "Fine, 12 it is. We'll go so unpredictable even we won't know what we're doing." "Sounds like home," Griggs quipped over the comms. His voice was a comforting scratch of sarcasm in their ears. The Zarthians hovered in the distance, their tentacles weaving through the air like drunken dancers at a rave. Apparently, they'd yet to figure out that foresight was as useful against humans as a chocolate teapot in a volcano. Ralston's phantom rifle seemed to shiver in anticipation, or maybe it was just as confused as she was. Either way, she decided to take that as a good sign. Remember, the plan is no plan. Just act like you're improvising your way through a bad karaoke night. Griggs snickered, his amusement crackling through the static. "If we die, can we blame your taste in music?" "If we die," Ralston replied, "you can blame everything you want. I won't be around to argue." With a nod to her team, she dove back into the fray, her movements as erratic and nonsensical as a cat on a Roomba. Her rifle spat digital chaos, not aiming so much as hoping for a lucky hit. In this world, luck had as much a place as logic did. The Zarthians, their tentacles flailing in the face of such unpredictability, seemed momentarily befuddled. Their foresight was struggling, trying to pin down a future that refused to be nailed to the wall. Vex joined her, dancing his own absurd dance, firing off shots in a rhythm that only made sense to him. "Come on, you oversized spaghetti monsters. Predict this." Apparently, the Zarthians hadn't accounted for Vex's particular brand of madness. They wavered, their psychic tentacles floundering like a coffee addict at a tea convention. Ralston dared to hope. It was working. The Zarthians were powerful, sure, but they were also the kind of creature that got stuck trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with a missing side. Griggs, ever the optimist, found himself a particularly unstable rock to leap from, his shots punctuating the air like exclamation marks. "I think they are starting to regret ever meeting us." Ralston smirked as she ducked under a stray tentacle, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "Let's make them regret it even more." The battlefield shifted again, as if the dreamscape itself was trying to join in on the madness. The ground rolled like the ocean in a storm, and Ralston nearly lost her footing, managing to right herself just in time to avoid a rather embarrassing faceplant. Griggs wasn't so lucky, hitting the ground with a thud and a colorful curse. "Someone tell the decorator to tone it down." Vex laughed, a breathless sound that spoke more of nerves than humor. "I'd say we're dancing on the edge of disaster, but then, isn't that what we always do?" The Zarthians, struggling to keep up with the humans' chaotic tactics, began to pull back, their retreat a disorganized mess of tentacles and psychic frustration. It was a beautiful sight, if your idea of beauty involved giant alien squids waving the white flag. Ralston seized the moment, pressing forward with her team close on her heels. They were winning, defying every odd, and it wasn't because of superior firepower or brilliant strategy. No, they were winning because they were the most unpredictable, insane collection of idiots in the galaxy, and they wore that badge with pride. "Keep pushing," Ralston shouted, her voice a rallying cry. "Let's show them what humans are made of, besides questionable dietary choices and poor decision-making skills." The dreamscape twisted in response, a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes that only added to the chaos. But Ralston didn't mind. She'd grown accustomed to the madness, learned to thrive in it. The Zarthians, realizing their precognition was about as useful as a chocolate frying pan, were in full retreat, their once organized ranks a tangle of confusion and desperation. They'd underestimated the humans, underestimated the power of sheer, unadulterated chaos. Vex, ever the optimist, added his own brand of motivation. "Come on, we've got them. Let's send them back to whatever cosmic sushi bar they crawled out of." Ralston couldn't help but grin. It was working. Against all logic, against every piece of conventional wisdom, they were winning. Their unpredictability was their greatest weapon, a chaotic force that no amount of foresight could counter. As the Zarthians continued to fall back, Ralston felt a surge of triumph. They'd done it. They'd proven that humans were more than just a bunch of meatbags fumbling through space. They were a force to be reckoned with, unpredictable and relentless. Griggs, somehow still managing to keep his humor intact, summed it up nicely. "Looks like they've finally met their match." "Good thing, too. I was beginning to think we'd have to start a book club with these guys." Ralston laughed, the tension of the battle easing away, replaced by the sweet victory they'd earned. They'd shown the universe that humans were more than the sum of their parts, more than just a chaotic anomaly. They were a species that thrived in the madness, that turned unpredictability into an art form. "All right, team," Ralston said, her voice steady despite the lingering adrenaline. "Let's wrap this up before they change their minds." They pushed forward, the Zarthians' retreat becoming a rout. It was a sight that filled Ralston with a fierce sense of pride. They'd beaten the odds, and they'd done it their way, with humor and insanity as their greatest weapons. As they reached the edge of the battlefield, Ralston allowed herself a moment to take it all in. They'd done it. They'd faced an enemy that should have outmatched them, and they'd come out on top. It was a victory that defied all logic, and she wouldn't have had it any other way. Griggs clapped a hand on her shoulder, his grin as wide as the galaxy. "I think we've earned ourselves a drink or seven." Vex nodded, his expression one of weary satisfaction. "And maybe a long nap. I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted from being this damn unpredictable." Ralston chuckled, the weight of the battle finally lifting. "Agreed. Let's get out of here before someone decides to rewrite the rules again." With a final glance at the retreating Zarthians, Ralston led her team away from the battlefield. They'd won, not through superior firepower or clever tactics, but through sheer, unrelenting chaos. It was a victory that spoke to the very essence of humanity, and Ralston couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. As they made their way back to safer ground, Ralston couldn't resist one last look at the dreamscape. It had been a wild ride, one she'd never forget. They'd faced an enemy that should have defeated them, but they'd turned the tables, shown the universe what humans were truly capable of. And in the end, they'd proven that sometimes, the best way to win was to embrace the madness and let the chips fall where they may. "So what's next?" Vex asked, his voice laced with curiosity. Ralston shrugged, a wry smile on her face. "Who knows, but whatever it is, I'm sure it'll be just as insane." Griggs laughed, the sound like gravel over glass. "Well, as long as we don't have to outrun another batch of tentacled fortune-tellers, I'm in." Ralston nodded, feeling the camaraderie that had carried them through thick and thin. They were a team, a mismatched bunch of misfits who'd somehow managed to pull off the impossible. And if they could do that, there was no telling what they might achieve next. "All right, let's head home," Ralston said, her voice filled with determination. We've got a galaxy to explore and a universe to annoy. With that, Ralston and her team set off into the unknown, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. They'd faced down the Zarthians, proven their worth, and emerged victorious. And as they walked away from the battlefield, they knew that the future was theirs for the taking, full of chaos, unpredictability, and the boundless possibilities that only humans could dream of. Ralston smiled to herself, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, she and her team would be ready. They'd proven they could adapt to anything, survive against the odds, and laugh in the face of danger. And as they moved forward, Ralston felt a sense of hope, a belief that whatever came next, they'd face it together, with humor, insanity, and a refusal to ever give up. The battlefield settled into a deceptive calm, the digital chaos slowly dissolving into something that resembled tranquility, but was more likely an intermission before another bout of cosmic insanity. Ralston leaned against a twisted construct that could have been a tree or a really enthusiastic coat rack, her phantom rifle still humming like it wanted an encore. "We did it," she said, more to herself than anyone else, the words tasting like a mix of disbelief and dry humor. "We actually did it." Vex flopped down beside her like a marionette with cut strings, catching his breath. "You know, I was almost convinced we'd end up as calamari." "Almost," Griggs chimed in, brushing dirt, or whatever passed for dirt in this psychedelic mess, off his shoulders. "I was planning my posthumous autobiography," Ralston snorted. "Title it How Not to Fight Tentacled Psychics. It'll be a bestseller." They surveyed the battlefield, or what was left of it. The Zarthians had slithered back to wherever they kept their spare tentacles, like a bunch of deflated balloons, leaving behind only a sense of victory and the occasional glitchy pixel. The air cracked with a familiar unsettling noise, a sound like someone trying to chew tin foil inside a washing machine. A Zarthian envoy, recognizable by its slightly more dignified flailing tentacles, hesitated on their threshold, a picture of awkwardness in a world where nothing felt real. "Ah, look who's back," Griggs murmured. "I thought we'd scared him off for good." "Maybe they're into masochism." Ralston waved a hand, not entirely sure if it was the universal gesture for come over or go away, "You're bothering us, but too tired to care." The Zarthian drifted closer, its tentacles coiling and uncoiling like it was nervous, or possibly just indecisive. "Now what?" Vex asked, eyeing the alien like one might a questionable piece of sushi that's been left out too long. Ralston shrugged. "Maybe it wants to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" "Who gets to keep the imaginary battlefield? I sure as hell don't want it." Griggs scoffed, his rifle slung over his shoulder like a half-forgotten thought. The Zarthian's voice, or rather, the sensation of a voice, sloshed into their minds. It was like listening to a drunk uncle at a wedding, full of awkward pauses and misplaced confidence. This time, though, it seemed more respectful, or maybe just desperate. "We underestimated your unpredictability," it said, each word slow and deliberate like it was tasting them. "Human capacity for chaos is formidable," Ralston smirked. "Yeah, we're real masters of disaster." "It's a gift." There was a pause, the kind that suggested the Zarthian was contemplating the weight of the universe or just having connectivity issues. "We propose cooperation." Griggs raised an eyebrow. "Cooperation? Well, slap me with a fish and call me a mermaid." Ralston shot him a look. "Griggs, keep your fantasies to yourself." Vex leaned in closer, curiosity overriding his usual sarcasm. "What kind of cooperation are we talking here? 'Cause if it's a tentacle wrestling tournament, I'm out." The Zarthian's tentacles twisted into what might have been a diplomatic gesture. "Your randomness neutralizes our foresight. Together, we could reshape possibilities." Ralston crossed her arms, the skeptical leader in her refusing to jump at the first offer. "Sounds like you need us more than we need you." "What's in it for us?" Another pause, this one filled with a shade of alien contemplation. "Mutual benefit. Our foresight can avert many human catastrophes, Galactic Cup predictions included." Vex snorted. "Guess they really know what gets humans excited. Betting on space soccer." Ralston pondered, her mind chewing over the proposal like a dog with an old shoe. The Zarthians' foresight could be invaluable, but trusting a species that had just tried to turn them into space debris was a gamble she wasn't sure they should take. "How do we know we can trust you?" Ralston asked, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 hesitant leaders before her. The Zarthian hesitated, its tentacles curling in what might have been an alien version of sincerity. "We have learned from our errors. Humans are not as predicted. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all day," Vex remarked, his voice dripping with irony. Ralston sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that ended in resignation. "All right, let's say we consider this. What's the first step?" "Dialogue," it replied, its tone almost hopeful. "Understanding." Ralston nodded slowly, the idea of forming an alliance with these tentacled psychics still settling in her mind like an unwelcome guest. But it made a twisted kind of sense. Chaos and foresight working together. It could either be a revolution or a complete disaster. Either way, it'd be one hell of a ride. "Okay," she said, feeling the weight of her decision. "We'll talk. But if you start getting handsy with those tentacles, all bets are off." "Agreed," the Zarthian responded, tentacles waving in a gesture that might have been relief or just a sudden breeze. Vex looked from the Zarthian to Ralston, a grin spreading across his face. "This ought to be fun. When do we start?" Griggs laughed, the sound like gravel in a blender. "How about after a drink?" "I think we've earned at least one." Ralston considered it. "Or 7. With the Zarthian floating off, presumably to spread the word of this strange new alliance, or maybe just to find a place to nurse its wounded pride. Ralston and her team began the trek back to their ship. "Do you think this is gonna work?" Vex asked, scanning the sky as if the answer might be written there in neon. Ralston shrugged, the movement as weary as it was thoughtful. "Who knows, but we've survived this long by embracing the chaos. Why stop now?" Griggs nodded, his expression a mix of approval and something else. Maybe respect, maybe just the realization he'd left the stove on back at the base. "Here's to unpredictability then. Our greatest weapon and our biggest curse." Ralston chuckled, feeling the camaraderie that had carried them through the insanity so far. "To unpredictability. May it always keep us one step ahead." As they climbed aboard their rattling, patched-together ship, Ralston felt a flicker of optimism amidst the swirling uncertainty. They'd won a battle none thought possible and found a potential ally in an enemy. It was absurd, improbable, and perfectly human. Vex dropped into a chair, looking as relaxed as someone who could fall asleep at a moment's notice. "Hey, if this works out, maybe we'll get our own holographic trophy. Most chaotic species." Ralston smirked. "I'll settle for survival. But a trophy sounds nice." As the ship hummed to life, pulling away from the dreamscape and into the infinite black beyond, Ralston felt the weight of the battle lift, replaced by a new challenge, a new frontier. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. They'd face it together, with the same irreverence and unpredictability that had brought them this far. Ralston took one last look at the fading colors of the dreamscape, the battlefield that had been their proving ground. It was a place of madness and magic, where they'd defied fate and rewritten possibilities. And now, it was time to see what new madness awaited. "So, what's the plan, boss?" Griggs asked, settling into the co-pilot seat with the ease of someone who'd escaped death one too many times. Ralston grinned, her eyes fixed on the horizon where stars danced like distant promises. "The plan, same as always, no plan at all." Vex chuckled, the sound a comforting thread in the air. "That's my favorite kind." As the ship surged forward, a streak of human ingenuity and defiance in the vastness of space, Ralston felt a swell of pride. They'd faced the impossible and won, and now, with a strange new alliance on the horizon, the universe was theirs to unravel. Ralston leaned back, arms crossed, her mind racing with the possibilities. They were heading into uncharted territory with nothing but chaos and camaraderie to guide them. It was risky, foolish, downright absurd. But it was also the most human thing they could do. And as they ventured into the unknown, Ralston knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd meet them head-on, with laughter, madness, and a refusal to ever back down. "All right, team," Ralston said, her voice a rallying cry that echoed in the small confines of the ship. "Let's go cause some trouble." With that, the ship shot forward, a beacon of unpredictability in the endless expanse, ready to face whatever came next with humor, insanity, and the unyielding spirit that defined them.